Welcome to the 2020 New Testament Challenge. Today we're in the book of Revelation, chapter 1. The book of Revelation was written by the Apostle John. This is the one that Jesus loved. John was the one at the Last Supper that was reclining back against Jesus. John is about 96 to 98 years old when he writes this book. He is on the island of Patmos. He's exiled there. But why is he exiled? Because of all the disciples, all of them were martyred except for John. As we read scripture, James is the first apostle that was martyred. He was put to death by the sword. Later we read that Peter was crucified. Tradition says that he was crucified upside down. And then Andrew was crucified as well. But he didn't want to be crucified as Jesus or as Peter. Instead of being nailed, he asked to be held to the cross by ropes. Then Philip was beheaded. Bartholomew was filleted and then beheaded. Thomas was stabbed with spears. Matthew was burned. James was pushed off the pinnacle of the temple and then stoned. Jude and Simon the Zealot were chopped to death. Matthias was stoned. And later, the Apostle Paul was beheaded. So what happened to John? He was first taken to a Colosseum. And then the emperor wanted him boiled in a vat of hot oil. He was put in, but nothing happened to him. He was brought out unharmed. It says that everyone in the Colosseum was then converted. Well, the emperor couldn't kill John, so he exiled him to the Isle of Patmos, thinking that was the last anyone would ever hear of John. But Jesus knew exactly where he was. And John met him there on that isolated island of Patmos, and he spoke to him and gave him the revelation of himself. We read in verse 12, as John is hearing Jesus, I turned around to see the voice who was speaking to me. And when I turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. And among the lampstands was someone like the Son of Man, dressed in a robe reaching down to his feet with a gold sash around his chest. His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in the furnace. His voice was like the sound of rushing waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars, and out of his mouth came a sharp double-edged sword. His face was like the sun, shining in all of its brilliance. And when I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. And then he placed his right hand on me and said, Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, and behold, I am alive forever and ever, and I hold the keys of death and Hades. As we read the book of Revelation, there's a promise that's given. In verse 3, Blessed is the one who reads the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear it and take to heart what is written in it, because the time is near. Whenever we read the book of Revelation, we will be blessed because we will be seeing Jesus. It's not about all the events that are listed, but it's about the revelation, the unveiling of Jesus as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, as the Judge, as the Almighty, as the one who is, who was, and who is to come. When John heard Jesus and saw Jesus, what did he see? He saw Jesus in a glorified state. He was in a robe with a gold sash around his chest. His head and his hair were white like wool. His eyes like blazing fire, so intense. Jesus was not seen here as the humble carpenter that John once knew. He's not the teacher who had worn sandals. No, his feet were like bronze that were glowing in the furnace. His voice was like that of rushing waters. If you've ever been to, say, Niagara Falls, and you're close to those falls, the sound of the water coming down, the roar is deafening. The voice of Jesus was like that of rushing waters. His mouth had a sharp double-edged sword. Everything he said was the truth. And his face shone like the sun. This is King Jesus. As we read through Scripture, we see Jesus as King. In Daniel, he is the King of heaven in Daniel 4. He's the King of the Jews in Matthew 2. He's the King of Israel in John chapter 1. He is the King eternal in 1 Timothy 1. He is the King of glory in Psalm 24. He is the King of nations in Revelation 15, and he is the King of kings in Revelation 19. So when John saw Jesus, what did he do? In verse 17, he fell at his feet in worship. There's a song by Mercy Me entitled, I Can Only Imagine. What's it going to be like when we see Jesus face to face? That was the question that the artist is asking in that song. I can only imagine what I'll do. I think we're going to be just like John. And when we see Jesus for who he really is, we will fall down and worship him. When we see Jesus as he really is, nothing or no one else will be able to compare. When we see Jesus, we will worship him. When we see Jesus, we will live for him. And just like all the disciples, when we understand who Jesus really is, we'll be willing to die for him too. So as you read the book of Revelation, we have the revelation of Jesus as the one who came to reign and will reign forever and ever. And therefore, we have hope. We know that victory is assured because Satan will be vanquished and Jesus will reign forever and ever, and we will reign along with him. Romans chapter 8, verse 31, Paul asks a question. If God is for us, who can be against us? That's a great question, because not only is Jesus coming to reign, but he's on the throne now, and he knows everything that is happening. He sees everything that's happening in your life and in mine. And so we can have confidence now and confidence later that if God is for us, who can be against us? This is great hope, and that's the message of the book of Revelation. During this month, as you read through the book of Revelation, you will be filled with hope and anticipation because we know that Jesus is Lord. Thank you for joining the 2020 New Testament Challenge.